While the visit of a high-profile head of state or world leader to Washington often generates major news coverage, but when it's the Pope, it ratchets up to a level not even a royal visit can match. The pomp.
Ladies and gentlemen.
The drama. The costumes. And, of course, the Pope-mobile.
The humble Pope on the most expensive street in the world.
This week's coverage of Francis had all the trappings of a royal visit, a state visit, and a religious revival all in one.
The most remarkable moment of this day, when a 5-year-old girl immigrated beyond the security line.
Charming for sure, but the euphoria seems to have rubbed off on the media.
It's hard not to appreciate that this is a glorious day and a glorious moment. You can't help but get swept up when there is a global moral leader who's addressing you.
Sure you can. Lost amid all the hoopla are the Vatican's numerous controversial positions, from its opposition to birth control, same-sex relationships, to the second-tier status of women, to name a few. But don't let me be a party pooper.
Pope Francis exciting so many people. George, you're in the center of it all again this morning.
Also brushed aside in the live coverage any mention of the numerous clergy abuse scandals and the short shrift given to victims by Francis.
The overwhelming response has been really something to witness here in Washington.
Well, John Boehner has one thing right. It's all enough to drive one to tears. I've been saying this for a long time when it comes to the Pope coverage. I mean, I'm not sure it would have gotten this kind of coverage if it hadn't been Washington and New York, but here's where I think reporters and anchors can sometimes get into troublesome area through the nomenclature, saying His Holiness or the Holy Father. That's not necessarily pertinent to everyone. So using the more acceptable terminology, the Pope, but to sort of embrace him as something that and a couple of reporters did that. Peter Alexander at NBC for one, and then I thought also like the live coverage of the Vesper service. I think was one thing to do the arrival in Washington, D.C., of course, the speech before Congress, but the rest of it seemed to me just, and then sort of the breathless take on it, too.
Well, he's good for business. I mean, this Pope, the Pope is good for business in general. This Pope is especially good for business. Let's not forget that the Boston Globe started its Crux website covering the Catholic Church because of interest in this Pope. So he's here now, and everybody's very excited about that. And I think a little bit of media hyperbole is okay. I don't know that in straight news coverage you necessarily want to be going after the church for some of the theological positions it holds. I do think that there hasn't been enough coverage of the Pope's failure to address the sexual abuse crisis as fully as he should.
And saying that the bishops showed courage when it was the victims who showed the courage.
I mean, Charlie Sennett of WGBH said on the radio that this Pope has been tone deaf about that, and there hasn't been enough about that.
Well, I think, go ahead. You want it to happen.
Well, he's also said some things over there. He's a very good politician in the sense that he is able to say things that please everybody. He says just enough to please the conservative Catholics and make it clear that he's not changing doctrine, and yet just enough to fit into this narrative that a lot of the media likes, that a lot of people want, that the Catholic Church is coming up to date with the social mores of the times. You know, he said things just friendly enough to gay Catholics, just friendly enough to women. He's not changing doctrine, yet he fits into this storyline that everyone wants to hear.
Exactly.
Although in a way I think you're right that he's a really good politician, but I also think that in a way, and he does this more artfully than his predecessor did, but in a way that's also sort of the bifurcation inside the Catholic Church, right? Is that it's profoundly liberal on some issues and profoundly conservative on other issues, which is one of the things that makes his arrival here so fascinating, because you get to see how liberals and conservatives in that joint session of Congress, for example, react to the message that he gives, which in a way has ingredients to alienate either side.
Or everyone can hear exactly what they want to hear.
They can't, right? Right. That's a good point. And he is good at softening the more problematic edges for consumption. I would add though that I think that we might be overgeneralizing about the media as a whole based on the morning talk shows, for example, which are not exactly known for their hard-hitting examination of issues. I feel like we've done stuff about,
You
what
have.
are the doctrinal choices. Well, I don't, but not just me. I mean, I think in a number of media outlets, you're going to find
it's the one
criticism
area that's
of what,
very hard for reporters to criticize. You can't criticize somebody else's religion. You can take pot shots at people who believe in ghosts. You could never take
No,
pot
but you
shots
can
at
find
somebody.
people, you can find Catholics who want to say he hasn't done enough to, make sure that there's a reckoning with the sexual abuse crisis. And many outlets, I think, have done that.
I would have to say that I think that the amount of coverage is probably a little bit off, but not too much. And I'm going to say that because there's a lot going on with this guy. Aside from what you have just mentioned, there is a change happening in the population of who are Catholics now around the world. The man came from Cuba to here. So much is framed by what he has been saying in other places, and here it's his first time here. And it's also, he's a Jesuit, and the emphasis on poverty and the poor and the basic tenets of what Catholicism is supposed to be about. All of that stuff has been discussed.
I think you should be discussing birth control,
well,
too.
no, I think I heard a lot of negative, not negative, but certainly not overly, oh yeah, the Pope is here, isn't it great kind of coverage. I heard people talk about some of the tough issues along the way, so I'd have to agree with Adam.
We didn't
on
even
this.
mention global warming, by
Right,
the way, in his
Yeah.
encyclical on that. So.